In the frostlit kitchens of Aurelia Prime, Kaelan Thorne was counting grains of salt into prime number piles. He did not look at his hands as they moved through the white crystals in the near darkness, nor did he acknowledge the hum of the cleaning droids passing his feet. To the ethel nobility who glided through the upper tiers of the prism spire, he was merely the husband of Princess Aloan Kalith, a decorative primitive meant to be ignored. Between the towering arches of the estate, he existed as a piece of living furniture, silent and secondary to the grand biological perfection of his wife's species. Every morning, before the amber sun climbed over the horizon of Aurelia Prime, I would find him there, tending to a small pot of Terran basil on the window sill. It sat withered and out of place among the glowing ethel crystals, a fragile green remnant of a world light years away. To my clinical ethel eyes, the plant was as pathetic as the man who watered it, yet he touched its leaves with a rhythmic precision that felt almost mathematical. Across the marble expanse of the balcony garden, the human stood as still as the statues of the primordial synod, his gaze fixed on the distance. The part that still keeps me up at night, it's not what the human did, but how long he'd been doing it. Stay close. Trouble arrived in the form of High Archon Valerius, whose shadow seemed to chill the very air of the prism spire as he initiated his campaign to strip Aloan of her rank. In the servant quarters, we whispered about the financial leaks and bureaucratic friction that began to plague the princess's administrative accounts. I watched Kaelan from the shadows of the maintenance corridors, noticing how he spent his afternoons wandering the lower levels of the palace where the light never reached. Those tiny bundles of earth-grown herbs, I watched him press into the calloused palms of the heavy labor droids and the weary hands of the laundry staff. He was scavenging. That was the only conclusion my ethel logic could reach as I observed him begging for companionship from those of us who lacked a lineage. It was a sign of human weakness, a desperate need for social warmth in a society built on the cold steel of hierarchy. During those weeks, the atmospheric pressure of the palace shifted, becoming heavy with the scent of scorched circuitry and the vibration of impending political collapse. Not a single ethel aristocrat noticed the way the service droids began to pause whenever Kaelan entered a room. Calculating. One evening, while I was repairing a faulty light fixture in the east wing, I felt a sharp sting as a shard of crystal sliced across my palm. A single drop of purple ethel blood pooled in my hand, catching the dim emergency light, before a shadow fell over me. Kaelan Thorne did not flinch or offer the expected clinical condolences of my people. Instead, he handed me a clean cloth he had been carrying in his pocket. It was a mundane gesture, entirely routine, yet he had moved toward me before I had even realized I was injured. Across the city of Aurelia Prime, the ripples of Valerius's attack grew into a tide that threatened to drown the princess's legacy entirely. Strange errors began to appear in the ethel code of hierarchy, small glitches that redirected palace resources toward the low-born sectors without explanation. The High Archon laughed at these mistakes, citing them as proof of Aloan's incompetence and the human rot she had brought into her household. From the perspective of the nobility, the system was simply failing because it was being touched by an inferior being. Beneath the observation deck, something shifted in the rhythm of the house. I began to notice that Kaelan never stepped where a droid was about to clean, and he always reached for a door a second before the sensor triggered. It was as if he were moving to a heartbeat only he could hear, a tempo that existed beneath the rigid protocols of our civilization. He remained the invisible husband, the man who spent his hours tending to a weed in a window, while the princess fought for her life in the courts above. Through the high arches of the prism spire echoed the low, grinding sound of orbital engines. The Ouroboros sigil had arrived, a shimmering band of impossible geometry that floated before Kaelan Thorne as he sat in the center of the kitchen floor. Valerius had finally triggered the trap, delivering a summons that meant the end of the human file and the permanent exile of the princess. In the corridors we froze, our symmetrical ethel bodies locking into postures of grief, yet the human only reached out to touch the floating metal with a steady hand. He looked at me, the maintenance servant he had treated as a peer for 6 years, and for the first time he broke the cultural quirk of my people. He looked me directly in the eyes. "The sigil is a heavy weight," I whispered, my voice trembling with the clinical fear of a discarded system. Kaelan stood, his movements possessing that same rhythmic, calculated fluidity I had mistaken for mere human fidgeting. "It's just a key, Vara. I've been waiting for them to send it." Before he departed for the orbital station of the primordial synod, the human paused to adjust the collar of his simple cotton shirt. He straightened the fabric with a calm, deliberate motion, ensuring the seam was perfectly aligned. Alone in the high chamber of the synod, Kalen Thorne sat cross-legged on the sterile white floor, looking up at 17 immortal judges who had never seen a being refuse to stand. Beneath the vaulted ceiling, the silence was absolute, a heavy pressure that usually crushed the will of any lesser species. From the observation tiers, I watched as he pulled a small flask from his coat and a crystal bowl meant for holy offerings. With a hand that did not shake, Kalen Thorne slowly poured earth-grown coffee into the sacred vessel, the dark liquid swirling against the white stone. The scent of roasted beans and earth-grown herbs rose through the air, a biological intrusion into a world of sterile perfection. "You are unclassifiable," the High Archon declared, his voice a vibration that rattled the glass of the observation deck. "A species of violence disguised in the skin of a servant." Kalen did not look up from the bowl. "You watched the river for 3 centuries, Archon, but you forgot that even the quietest water eventually cuts through stone. You spent so long looking down at us that you stopped seeing the floor you were standing on." Across the chamber, a data readout flickered, revealing the total collapse of High Archon Valerius's private accounts. Every error I had seen in the maintenance logs, every scavenged bundle of basil, had been a coordinate in a shadow network of service droids and laundry staff who now held the keys to the ethel economy. Kalen spoke of Kalen, the page who had died of lung crystals because the ethel logic found him inefficient, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. This was the science of human persistence. They did not hunt with claws but with time, applying administrative friction until the system itself chose to break. "We are the only species that has to choose to be kind every morning," Kalen said, his voice cutting through the clinical silence. "And today I am choosing to offer you a seat of paradox." The synod adjourned without a hostile ruling, the human file remaining open for the first time in an eon. Back in the palace kitchen at dawn, the amber sun touched the rim of a ceramic cup. Eloan Kalith stood by the window, her rigid ethel mask discarded on the floor like a piece of broken glass. She reached out, her fingers brushing the leaves of the Terran basil, which now stood tall and vibrant in the morning light. The dark ship above continued its silent orbit, steel and shadow against an empty sky. Eloan took the cup of coffee, the steam rising between them in the quiet air. On the High Archon's empty seat in the garden, the small pot of green herbs remained, its roots tangled deep within the ethel marble. The city below began to stir, a million lights reflecting in the dark liquid of the bowl. The last ship in the fleet was named Remember.